The great hall of Winterfell was colder than usual. Snow fell lightly outside, clinging to the old stones as servants moved about lighting torches. It had been 3 days since King Robert Baratheon arrived in the north, not just for a feast, not just for friendship, but for something bigger. He had come with a plan that shocked Lord Eddard Stark almost as much as it worried him. Robert wanted to train Robb, not just as a northern lord, but as a future king. "You know I hate all this damn ruling, Ned," he had said over cups of strong ale. "But your boy, he's got the blood. He's got your honor and my fire. What if we shaped him together?" At first Ned resisted. Robb was still just a boy of 16, proud and stubborn. But Robert was persistent. "I'll take him back to the capital with me. Teach him the game. You teach him honor. I'll teach him how to survive." And so, after nights of discussion, the decision was made. Robb Stark would leave Winterfell, not as a hostage or guest, but as a ward of the crown, personally mentored by the king and the hand of the king, his own father. Catelyn wept quietly the night Robb departed. Jon Snow, watching his half-brother ride away, felt something break in his chest. King's Landing welcomed Robb with curiosity and quiet suspicion. A Stark boy among Lannisters? It stirred whispers, but Robert didn't care. He publicly named Robb as the future of this kingdom, north and south alike. He ordered Sir Barristan to train him in swordplay. He made Renly teach him charm and court manners. He forced Robb to sit in on council meetings, even when the boy found them dull. "Listen now," Robert growled one day during a small council meeting. "You think leading is about swinging swords. You better learn to hear lies behind soft words." Robb was different from other nobles in court. He wasn't cruel like Joffrey, nor slimy like Littlefinger. But he was proud, and that pride made him enemies. Cersei never liked him. "The North remembers indeed," she muttered more than once. Despite the tension, Robb learned fast. He asked questions. He watched men closely. He saw how Varys spoke much and said little. He noticed how Pycelle pretended to be old and weak. Slowly, the boy Lord of Winterfell turned into something more dangerous, a young man with honor and strategy. Back in Winterfell, Ned missed his son. He often stood at the Godswood, wondering if he had done the right thing. But letters came. Letters full of questions, ideas, and sometimes doubts. "Father," one read, "can a man rule with honor in a world full of vipers?" And Ned wrote back, "Yes, but he must wear his honor like armor, not like chains." Years passed. Robb grew stronger, smarter, and more politically dangerous. The lords of the realm began to whisper again, but this time louder. What if Robert means to make him heir? What of his own son, Joffrey? The storm was coming, and somewhere deep in the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister started to sharpen her claws. And still, Robb trained, not just with steel but with silence. Not just in war, but in ruling. He was becoming something rare in Westeros, a man who could fight like a wolf but think like a lion. The Red Keep was never silent, not truly. Whispers moved through its stone walls like smoke, harmless at first, until the fire came. And lately the whispers had names. Robb Stark, Joffrey Baratheon. Cersei Lannister. Robb had spent nearly 2 years in King's Landing now. He was taller, broader at the shoulders and sharper in speech. He still wore the Stark colors, but his northern stiffness had softened just enough. He learned when to smile, when to stay silent, and when to speak like a future ruler. But Joffrey hated him. It wasn't just rivalry. It was something uglier, jealousy mixed with fear. Joffrey had grown up believing the throne was his by right, that he was the lion and the stag. But Robb's presence cast a long shadow, and worse, the king himself had started saying things out loud that stirred fear in the queen's heart. "If I'd had a son like Robb," Robert muttered one night at a feast. "Drunk and bitter, this kingdom would already be at peace." Cersei heard it. So did half the court. From that day on, the queen's smiles around Robb became colder, thinner. She never insulted him directly. No, she was too clever for that. But she let others do it for her. Little jabs at dinner, rude looks, snide comments hidden as jokes. One evening at a royal hunt, Joffrey deliberately steered his horse too close to Robb's, trying to provoke him. When Robb kept calm, Joffrey spat, "You still smell like snow and dog." Robb didn't flinch. "Better than smelling like fear, your grace," the words stung. Joffrey raised his hand as if to strike him, but Robert barked a laugh from behind them. "That's enough, both of you. Save your anger for the wild boars." But Robb's calm worried Cersei more than his pride. He was learning to play the game and winning, so she began her quiet work. She invited lords to dine. Lords who had sons of their own. She reminded them that the North had always been too proud, too independent. She asked why Robert was wasting his time shaping a boy who'd never kneel. She reminded them softly that Joffrey was the true heir, blonde, beautiful, and born of royal blood. But there were doubts. Ned Stark still served as hand, and his honor meant something to many. And the South had begun to grow tired of Lannister gold controlling every purse string. Meanwhile, Robb had started to write to his siblings. He missed Jon the most. Their letters were short but full of meaning. "Robb, there's poison in every smile here, Jon, but I'm learning not to drink from every cup. Jon, and I'm learning how to survive in the cold. Maybe someday we'll meet again as different men." Sansa, now in court with her father and Robb, had taken notice of her brother's rise. The other ladies admired him. Even some noble daughters whispered of Robb Stark as a better match than the cruel, sneering prince. Sansa didn't say much, but she began to see her brother not just as a sibling, but as a force. Arya didn't care for court. She hated the dresses, the rules, the way everyone lied with their eyes. But she liked watching Robb speak in the small council. He reminded her of their father, only younger, fiercer, and less tired. One night, after a long council meeting, Robb asked Ned quietly, "Do you trust the King's Council?" Ned sighed. "No, but you can't rule without them. And if they all lie to your face? And then you learn to tell the truth in ways that make them afraid to lie again." Robb nodded. "I think I understand now." But Ned saw something in Robb's eyes, something both proud and dangerous. The boy was growing into a man faster than Ned had hoped. And in King's Landing, fast growth was like flying too close to the sun. Then came the letter from Stannis Baratheon. A quiet letter sealed in black wax. Only Robert, Ned, and Robb saw it. And its words threatened to crack the realm open like a ripe fruit. "The boy, Joffrey, is not the king's true-born son." Robb read it in silence. Robert crushed the letter in his fist. Ned said nothing, but that was the moment they all felt the air shift. Joffrey was not the heir. The line of succession was broken. And suddenly, the idea of Robb Stark sitting the throne no longer sounded like fantasy. It sounded like a question of when, and someone, somewhere in the Red Keep, decided that Robb Stark must not leave King's Landing alive. The sun set blood red over the Red Keep, painting the sky like a warning. Inside the castle, everything looked the same. Guards at their posts, nobles at their feasts, whispers behind curtains. But something had shifted. The truth in Stannis' letter was poison in the heart of the realm, and it was spreading fast. Robb could feel it. He wasn't a boy anymore. He didn't need someone to say danger out loud. He could hear it in how the gold cloaks avoided his eyes, how Varys suddenly grew more careful with his words, how even Sir Barristan, loyal and noble, seemed always watchful now when Robb was near. But the real storm was in the small council. Robert, shaken by the truth, started drinking even more. At one meeting, he slammed his cup down and shouted, "They made a fool of me. My whole bloody reign built on a lie." Cersei had not yet been confronted, not directly. Robert wanted proof. He wanted time. But time was a luxury he no longer had. That night, Ned pulled Robb aside. "We have to leave the capital," Ned said quietly, his face grave. "There are too many snakes here. If Robert won't act, then we must." Robb didn't argue. He felt it too. But something kept him from packing his things. "If we run, father, we look guilty, weak, like traitors." "You sound like Robert. Maybe he's not wrong." Ned's jaw tightened, but he didn't scold. Robb wasn't a boy following orders anymore. He was becoming something else, a leader. And that scared Ned almost as much as the Lannisters did. That same night, Varys appeared in Robb's chambers without warning, as he always did, like a shadow that knew all your secrets. "You're being watched." "Young wolf," Varys said, his voice soft as silk. The Queen has eyes everywhere. She fears what you represent. What do I represent? Robb asked, tightening his belt. Hope or war? Depends who you ask, Robb studied the spider. And what do you want? Varys gave a thin smile. I want the realm to survive. And right now, survival means staying one step ahead of the Queen. Robb didn't trust him, but he listened. The next day, Robb changed his patterns. He stopped walking alone. He spoke less. He slept with a dagger beneath his pillow. Arya noticed it first. You think someone's going to try to kill you? She asked, half-whisper, eyes wide. I think someone already has, Robb said grimly, and he wasn't wrong. That very night, a kitchen boy, newly hired, quiet and nameless, brought Robb a cup of wine meant to help him sleep. It smelled normal, tasted normal. But Ghost, the white direwolf brought south from Winterfell, knocked the cup from Robb's hand before he could drink. The boy ran. Robb chased. The guards caught him at the stables, and what they found in his pocket turned everyone cold. A tiny vial, sealed tight, and inside it, clear liquid with no scent. Strangler, said Maester Pycelle, stroking his beard. Very deadly, very silent. Robert was furious. Cersei pretended to be shocked. Who would want to harm the boy? She said, all wide eyes and false concern. But Robb wasn't fooled. Neither was Ned. The attack was a warning, a test. They couldn't afford another. That night, Ned met with Renly and Ser Barristan in secret. The king won't act, so I must protect my son myself. We're leaving the city before the week ends. Do you think Robert will allow it? Ser Barristan asked. I won't ask. But fate had its own plans, because the next morning, Robert Baratheon went hunting and didn't come back. They said it was a wild boar. They said he was drunk, slow, careless. But Robb knew. Everyone knew. The king's death came far too quickly, far too clean. And the very next morning, Cersei declared Joffrey as king before the ink on Robert's will had even dried. Ned had the will. It named Robb Stark as the king's ward and trusted regent until the truth of the succession could be proven. But Cersei had the throne and the swords. The day of Robert's funeral, the realm mourned a drunken king, and a quiet war began. Robb stood in the shadows of the sept, wearing stark black. He watched as Cersei, dressed like a grieving widow, whispered to Pycelle and smirked at Littlefinger. And he realized, for the first time, that the North would never be safe again, not while lions ruled the South. He turned to his father. We can't run anymore. Ned met his eyes. Then we fight. But not with swords, not yet. Robb nodded, but deep down, the wolf in him was already howling for blood. The wind howled through the Red Keep's high towers like a warning from the old gods. But no one in King's Landing was listening. They were too busy scheming, lying, and preparing for war. And in the shadows of the throne room, where the Iron Throne loomed sharp and cold, young Robb Stark knew. This was no longer about alliances or honor. This was survival. Robert Baratheon was dead. Officially, it was the boar. Unofficially, everyone whispered it was the Queen. And now Joffrey sat the Iron Throne like a golden-haired curse, barking orders and swinging threats like toys. The court bent its knee quickly, most out of fear, a few out of greed, but Robb didn't bend, and that alone made him dangerous. Ned still held the king's final will, signed with Robert's shaky hand. It named Lord Eddard Stark as protector of the realm, until the rightful heir could be confirmed. Ned, foolish in his honor, had believed he could use the truth as a weapon. He didn't realize the court had long since stopped caring about truth. That same evening, Littlefinger approached Ned in his solar. His tone was soft, his smile patient. You can name Robb Protector, Lord Stark. You can even try to seat him in place of the boy. But the Queen, she has the gold cloaks. She has the throne, and she has no mercy left. Ned, stone-faced, said nothing. You need allies, Littlefinger continued, and not the kind that live in the north. You need southern knives, sharp, quiet ones. Ned refused. He didn't trust Littlefinger, but Robb listened from the corridor, heart racing. He was learning something faster than most lords ever did. In King's Landing, honor didn't keep you alive. The next day, Joffrey summoned the court to the throne room. He sat high, smug in his golden armor, the crown heavy on his head like a joke. Cersei stood beside him, one hand resting on the hilt of her guardsman's sword, Sir Meryn Trant. The small council lined up like actors in a play. And Ned walked in with the king's will in his hand. "I have Robert Baratheon's final words," Ned announced. "He named me protector of the realm, until the true heir comes of age." Cersei didn't blink. "And what heir would that be, my lord?" "Not your son," gasps filled the hall. A few drew back. Joffrey's face twisted in rage. "Seize him!" he screamed. But Robb was already moving. He stepped in front of his father, hand on his sword. "Touch him, and blood will spill in this room." The gold cloaks hesitated. Some knew Robb, respected him, but others were already paid. Chaos erupted. Blades were drawn. Sir Barristan stepped between Ned and the gold cloaks. Varys slipped away. Littlefinger vanished. And in that heartbeat of silence before the storm, Cersei gave the nod. That's when Renly Baratheon did something no one expected. He shouted, "Stand down!" Everyone stand down. Dozens of Baratheon loyalists, Knights of Storm's End, entered the throne room, swords drawn, forming a wall between the Lannisters and the Starks. "This is madness," Renly growled, glaring at his sister. "You crown a bastard, spill a king's blood, and expect the realm to obey." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "You'd side with wolves now, brother." "I'd side with truth. And if we don't stop this now, the realm will burn." For a moment, no one moved. Robb kept his eyes on Joffrey. Joffrey, shaking with anger, looked like a child pretending to be king. Then slowly, the gold cloaks lowered their weapons. Not all, but enough. Ned turned to Renly. "We need to leave this city, now." Renly nodded. "My men will get you to the river gate." "I can't promise more than that." It wasn't much, but it was enough. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, the Stark household fled the Red Keep. Sansa weeping, Arya silent and angry. Robb rode beside his father, ghosts stalking the shadows like death itself. By morning, they were gone. A trail of empty beds and broken oaths left behind, and Cersei Lannister's fury shook the stones of the Red Keep. She sent riders after them. She bribed every innkeeper, every bridge guard, but it was too late. The wolves were loose. Robb Stark had escaped with his father, his sisters, and Robert's will. And more importantly, he had escaped with something far more dangerous, the knowledge of how to win. Back in the Riverlands, the banners began to rise. From the north, the Vale, the Stormlands. Lords who had bent the knee to Robert now questioned Joffrey's rule. Ravens flew. Swords were sharpened. War was coming, and at the head of it, riding a grey horse through the mist with steel in his eyes, was Robb Stark. Not a boy, not a lord, but a king in the making. The North remembers. It wasn't just a saying now. It was a fire burning across every keep, every hall, every village from the neck to the wall. The news spread like a storm. Ned Stark betrayed. Robb Stark escaped. The Lannisters had taken the throne. And just like that, the wolves began to howl. From White Harbor to Bear Island, the banners rose. Houses who hadn't marched in a generation sent men with steel in hand. Sir Rodrik Cassel rode through the snow with 1,000 men behind him. The Greatjon roared oaths loud enough to shake the Dreadfort's cold stones. Even old House Mormont sent warriors, led by a woman with a sword on her back and vengeance in her eyes, and at the center of it all stood Robb Stark. He had crossed the neck under heavy guard, flanked by men who had once bowed to his father, but now looked at him with a different kind of respect. Not just as a lord, not even as a son avenging his father. They looked at him as a king, but Robb wasn't thinking about crowns. Not yet. His thoughts were still on King's Landing, on the moment Joffrey raised his voice, on Cersei's smirk, on the way Sir Barristan had looked at him. Torn between duty and truth, his father had risked everything to do what was right, and Robb had watched the realm laugh in his face. He would not make the same mistake. In River Run the lords gathered. The Tullys, the Karstarks, the Umbers, the Glovers, all packed into the great hall, the air thick with smoke and fury. Catelyn Stark stood to the side, her face pale but firm. She had seen her husband shamed, her daughters hunted, and now her son stood at the edge of war. One by one, the lords shouted their oaths. The Lannisters butchered the king who raised us. The South cannot rule the North. Robb Stark rides for justice. And then came the words that changed everything. The king in the North. The hall shook with it. Over and over, louder and louder, until even the stones seemed to echo. The king in the North. Robb didn't speak at first. He looked at the men, most older than him, harder than him, and saw not just rage, but faith. They wanted someone who could lead them through the fire, someone who could strike back. And Robb, though young, had something even rarer than experience. He had purpose. He stepped forward and spoke with the calm of winter. "I did not ask for a crown," he said, "but I will wear one if it means putting an end to the corruption that has infected this realm." A pause. The hall listened. "I will ride south not for glory, but for justice, for my father, for the North, for the realm my sisters still suffer in." He looked to the banners, flapping in the torchlight. "Let them hear it from the wall to dawn. The North will not kneel." The lords roared again, but while swords were being sharpened in River Run, the Lannisters were already moving. Tywin Lannister was no fool. He heard of Robb's march, and answered not with words but fire. He ordered Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, to raid the Riverlands. Villages were burned, fields salted, peasants slaughtered. Cersei, now Queen Regent, sent out ravens demanding loyalty, but few answered. Her power lay in gold and fear, not love, and gold could only buy so much silence. Joffrey, meanwhile, grew more unstable by the day. He ordered executions for minor slights, stripped noblemen of their lands for imagined offences. Even the council grew uneasy. "He plays king," whispered Lord Varys, "but he has not the patience of a prince, nor the wisdom of a squire." Meanwhile, Sansa Stark was still trapped in the lion's den, forced to smile through clenched teeth, watched by spies, tormented by Joffrey's cruelty, but she wasn't broken. She had heard the rumours. Robb rides south, and she clung to that like a prayer. Far to the east, even the Night's Watch began to feel the tension. Letters arrived at Castle Black, asking for aid, for men, for allegiance. Jon Snow read them in silence, his fist tightening. The realm was cracking apart, and Robb Stark had become the hammer. By the time his army reached the Trident, over 20,000 men marched behind him. Men who'd never seen war, but who were ready to bleed for their king. Catelyn rode beside him. "You know what must come next," Robb nodded. "We take the twins, we cross the river, and then—" He stared south. "We bring war to the lions." The air at the twins was thick with mud, mist, and mistrust. Robb Stark sat atop his horse, eyes locked on the grim grey towers that stood on either side of the Green Fork. The stone bridge connecting them was the only way across for miles, and behind him 20,000 men waited for that crossing, and Walder Frey knew it. The Lord of the Crossing had kept them camped for 2 days without a response, claiming sickness, delays, and unfortunate weather as excuses. Everyone knew it was a game. "He's stalling," growled the great Jon, gripping his sword. "We should take the bridge by force." Catelyn Stark shook her head firmly. "That's exactly what he wants. He'd rather see a Stark army drown in blood than show weakness to his brood." Robb didn't speak. He was watching the river, listening. Finally a raven came, and an invitation. Lord Frey would receive Catelyn Stark only. It was a risk, but she accepted. And for 3 long hours, Robb waited outside the towers, every sound from within the wind pushing his nerves closer to snapping. When Catelyn emerged, her face was unreadable. "Well?" Robb asked. She sighed. "He'll let us cross on conditions." Robb raised an eyebrow. "He wants your word that when the war is over, you'll marry one of his daughters." The men around him exploded in protest. Even Robb's own face twisted. "I am not a horse to be traded, mother." "No," Catelyn said gently, "you're a king, and kings pay for bridges in blood or in promises." There was silence. Then Robb nodded. "So be it. If it means getting to River Run in time, I'll give him my word." They crossed the next morning. Frey's soldiers watched from the walls like crows over a battlefield. Robb barely looked at the daughters lined up along the bridge, 12 in total, plain-faced, stone-eyed and silent. He made no promises of love, only a vow. And Walder Frey, satisfied, gave his blessing with the smile of a man who had just claimed a secret debt from a future king. Within 2 days, Robb's army reached River Run, where his uncle Edmure had held off the Lannister forces at great cost. The castle was under siege, its walls blackened by fire and its people near starving. But with the north behind him, Robb broke the siege like a hammer through glass. His men stormed the field with terrifying speed, splitting the Lannister ranks in two. Grey wind leapt through flames and steel, ripping men down as Robb led the charge on horseback, sword flashing like a storm come to life. By sundown, the field was theirs. Thousands dead, and among the prisoners, Jaime Lannister. Robb dismounted, blood on his face, sweat soaking his cloak. He stared down at the Kingslayer, who knelt in chains before him, smirking even in defeat. "You've won a battle, boy," Jaime spat. "But battles don't win wars." Robb's eyes were cold. "No, but this war won't be won by talk either." Behind them, men cheered. The king in the north had struck his first true blow, and all of Westeros would feel it. That night, as the camp settled, Catelyn found her son in the war tent, staring at a map by candlelight. "You did well," she said, voice soft. He didn't look up. "Did I?" Catelyn stepped closer. "You've won your first battle, captured their greatest knight. You've made them bleed, but my sisters are still prisoners. Father's name is still stained. The Lannisters still rule the throne." He clenched his jaw. "One battle isn't enough." "No," she agreed. "But it's the beginning." Robb's hand hovered over the map. "We strike the Westerlands next. Hit them where it hurts, where they keep their gold." Catelyn frowned. "You'll be marching deeper into their lands. The farther we go, the less help we'll have." "I don't need help," Robb said, standing tall. "I need victory." That night, as torches burned in celebration and wine flowed through the tents, a different kind of fire smoldered in the shadows. Roose Bolton watched Robb from afar, eyes like a snake in the dark. He said nothing, but inside, the seeds of doubt began to bloom. Power was shifting. Old loyalties were cracking, and some northern lords had begun to whisper. Why should a boy wear the crown forever? Back in King's Landing, the news of Jaime's capture hit the court like a thunderclap. Cersei screamed. Joffrey smashed goblets in his rage. And Tywin Lannister, the Lion of the Rock, turned his gold eyes toward the north, with one thought in mind: I will not lose to a child. The game had changed. No longer whispers and warnings. Now it was war. The Westerlands didn't welcome Robb Stark with open arms. They greeted him with fire and steel. From the moment his banners crossed the river, the Golden Lion roared back. Villages loyal to House Lannister were abandoned or burned, their lords fleeing into the hills. Robb wasn't just marching through enemy territory now, he was marching into the lion's den. But he didn't hesitate. Every step deeper into the Westerlands was a message. The North doesn't fear gold. The wolf has come to take its due. He split his army into three, one under Lord Rickard Karstark, another under the great Jon Umber, and the third with himself and Grey Wind leading the centre. His plan was simple: strike fast, strike hard, and leave no safe haven for the lion's cubs to hide in. At first, it worked. The fortress at Ashmark fell in 2 days. Robb's forces moved swiftly through the countryside, cutting off supply lines, torching Lannister forges, and scattering what remained of their garrisons. Refugees poured toward Casterly Rock, bringing tales of the Northern King who never lost, the direwolf who tore knights apart, and an army that marched like the old kings of winter had risen again. But while Robb took castles, Tywin Lannister took counsel. In the heart of Casterly Rock, Tywin sat in silence, staring at a map of the Westerlands, lit only by candlelight. Around him, his advisors argued, "They're cutting us off from the east. We must recall men from the Crownlands. Send ravens to the Reach." Tywin raised a hand, and the room fell silent. "Robb Stark is not a boy," he said coldly. "He's a threat. A smart one, And like all threats, he must be dealt with at the root. He turned to his new ally, Lord Roose Bolton. Roose stood calm, his pale eyes unreadable. "The Starks trust me," he said softly. "I've been at Robb's side since the first march." Tywin gave a thin smile. "Then it's time you earned your next reward." Far away, Robb stood on the battlements of a captured Lannister outpost. The night air was cool, and the fires in the distance marked where another estate had fallen. His men were celebrating, but he couldn't. He was winning, but it didn't feel like victory. Every step forward brought him further from River Run, from Winterfell, from his sisters. And despite their momentum, the deeper they went, the harder the resistance became. Supplies ran low. The Westerlands weren't fertile like the Riverlands. The people here hated the wolf banners. And most dangerous of all, there was no Tywin. "He's drawing us in," Robb told his mother one night. "He wants us tired, starved, cornered," Catelyn nodded. "Then we pull back. We can hold the Riverlands and let the lions come to us." But Robb shook his head. "Not yet. I need one more blow, one that makes him bleed." And so he marched on Craighall, one of the last strongholds before Casterly Rock itself. But Tywin had already planned for that. Robb's scouts returned one morning with grim news. Lannister riders, thousands of them, are moving behind us fast, too fast. They're not trying to defend Craighall, Robb realized. They're trying to trap us. He was right. 3 days later, at the Battle of Sable Hill, Robb's forces were surrounded. Lannister knights poured in from the hills, and for the first time, the wolf banner stumbled. The Great Jon was injured. Hundreds were slain. Only a desperate, brilliant retreat led by Robb himself kept the army from being wiped out entirely. They escaped into the woods, but they were bleeding now. And worst of all, the ravens stopped arriving. No word from the Riverlands, no letters from River Run, no updates from Winterfell. Something was wrong. Back at camp, Robb confronted Roose Bolton. "We're being cut off. Our supply lines are gone. I trusted you to hold the crossings at the Tumblestone." Rose's voice was calm as always. "I sent men, but I fear some were delayed." Robb narrowed his eyes. "Delayed how?" Roose said nothing, but Robb felt it cold in his bones. Someone was betraying him, and as he stood alone that night in his tent, reading over a map stained with blood, a single raven finally arrived, its message short and brutal: "Winterfell has fallen. The Ironborn have taken it. Bran and Rickon are missing." Robb dropped the scroll. For a long time he said nothing, then quietly he whispered, "They were just boys." After the raven came, bringing news of Winterfell's fall and his brother's disappearance, Robb stood motionless in his tent for nearly an hour. The fire burned low beside him, but he didn't feel the heat. Around him, his commanders waited. Roose Bolton, Lord Karstark, the Great Jon, none daring to speak first. Finally, Robb spoke, and his voice was hoarse. "Bran. Rickon." He didn't finish the sentence. "Couldn't that night. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep." He sat outside the tent with Grey Wind curled silently beside him, both of them staring at the stars. Catelyn found him there at dawn. Her face was pale, grief barely hidden beneath the surface. "We don't know if they're dead," she said softly, "but we don't know if they're alive either," Robb replied. "And we should have been there." She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he'd done what a king must. That war had pulled them all apart. But she saw in his eyes something heavier than guilt. It was doubt, the kind that cracks kings from the inside out. By the next day, the War Council was in chaos. "We need to turn back north. Winterfell must be reclaimed. We don't even know if the Ironborn still hold it." "We're surrounded, my lords. Tywin's moved half his army behind us." But the loudest voice belonged to Lord Rickard Karstark, his grief still fresh from the Lannister ambush that killed his sons. "I told you," Karstark growled, pointing at Robb. "Your pride would lead us here. You chose to fight in the Lion's Land instead of protecting your own." "I chose to strike while we had momentum," Robb answered, voice low but steady. "We knew the risk. You lost my sons," Karstark spat. "You lost your brothers. And now you lose my loyalty. Before anyone could stop him, Karstark stormed from the tent, his men following. Robb said nothing as the flap fell closed behind them, but his silence screamed, and in the shadows behind the council, Rose Bolton watched it all with calm, calculating eyes. That evening, a second raven came. River Run is under siege. The Freys have turned. Lord Edmure is trapped inside. The betrayal landed like a sword to the stomach. The very bridge Robb had bought with his word, his honor, had turned into a trap. The Freys had waited, watched, and now, with Tywin backing them, they struck. "He's boxed us in," Catelyn whispered. "North cut off, east under fire, Freys to the west, and Tywin closing from the south," Robb nodded. "He's turning the river into a coffin." And still he refused to beg, refused to kneel. Instead, he called for a raven of his own. "To the Vale," he told the Maester. "To Lisa Arryn, tell her, if she ever loved her sister, she will open the bloody gate." But even he knew the chances were slim. As desperation crept in, so did poison. Rose Bolton visited Robb in the quiet hours, always soft-voiced, always reasonable. "There is another way," he said. Robb raised an eyebrow. "You mean betrayal?" "I mean survival." But Robb turned his face away. "We are not Lannisters." Rose said nothing, but his silence echoed. Soon after, news came that Lord Karstark had executed 2 Lannister captives in revenge for his sons. Robb had no choice but to pass judgment. He sentenced Karstark himself, and as he raised the sword, his mother watching in quiet horror. Robb Stark whispered the same words his father once had. "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." The execution broke more than a neck. It shattered Robb's support. Half the Karstark men abandoned camp by morning. Now Robb had fewer allies, fewer options, and enemies at every gate. That's when Lord Walder Frey sent a message. "I will forgive the broken betrothal. I will restore my allegiance. But only if your grace will honor us with a visit at the twins. For a wedding." It smelled of a trap. Catelyn begged him to refuse. But Robb, weary and cornered, saw something else. "If there's even a chance to turn Frey back to our side, I must try." And so Robb Stark rode for the twins, against the wind, against his gut, against the warnings that echoed like ghost voices in the back of his mind. He was not the same boy who rode south years ago. He had won battles, lost brothers, gained a crown, buried his honor piece by piece. And still he rode, because hope for a Stark dies slower than most things. And so the king marched into his final feast, with wolves at his back and knives waiting beneath the smiles.